Hello out there in internet land. This is Fat and Angry. He's fat and I'm angry. And today we're going to go ahead and talk about video games again. In particular, fighting games. Well, just to let you guys know, this is February 17th when we're recording this. I'm going to go ahead and start dating these just so that you guys have an idea of how long it takes us to put these things from just recordings to full videos. And realize just how procrastinating and lazy we both are. So yeah. Alright, Fats, you are much more well versed in fighting games than I am. Tell me how you got started in it.
Well, I would say it started with beat-em-up games, because those kind of happened before the single one-on-one fighting games. The first one I remember playing was Double Dragon in the arcades. And that thing was a brutal son of a bitch. I never got past the alleyway where you're fighting the Mr. T looking Abobo. I remember one time on a field trip, they took us to an arcade.
You lucky bastard.
And the manager put all the machines on free mode. So
you extra lucky bastard.
So I went to Double Dragon, and I spent the whole time there, and I could not get past that goddamn alley. Now, I own the arcade version on my PlayStation, and have since actually gotten to play it with skill and knowledge of how to actually play the game.
As opposed to, like, frustration and youthful ignorance.
Yes, I do more than just press the kick button because I think kicks are cooler than punches. And now I can beat it on about 10 credits. I'm trying to get better than that, but so far 10 credits seems to be the mark. And then from there it was the Streets of Rage and Final Fight games that I got to play. And I had a lot of fun with those. There was one, I don't remember what it was called, but I know it was an SNK game. And basically as you defeated certain opponents, you got to take their soul, and your character could actually morph into some of the souls that you had taken.
I think I might know which game you're talking about, but the name escapes me right now.
Yeah, I remember in particular, it was one level, it's like after you defeated the boss, you just suddenly ended up in the clouds, and there were all these samurai.
I think it was Sengoken or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Possibly. The name wasn't an English name, and it was so long ago that I don't remember.
But as soon as you mentioned beating a boss and immediately being teleported to the sky and fighting samurai ghosts on cloud tops, I definitely remember something to that effect too. They used to have that one in an SNK bundle arcade system back in one of the Peter Piper pizzas here in town.
Yeah, where I got to play it was actually in a bowling alley, and it was one of the SNK multi.
Yeah, that's what I mean, one of those bundle arcade things.
Yeah, and that's actually where I got to discover King of Fighters, which was the first fighting game I played. Unless you count that little demo mode on the Double Dragon for the NES, but
you can pick any character you want, so long as you don't mind it being for both players.
Yeah, and the computer has more health than you. But yeah, King of Fighters was my introduction to fighting games, and while that one isn't quite the one-on-one experience that most fighting games are now, because you get a team, you do only get to play one character at a time.
Yeah, it was the first game, to my understanding, that actually had a tagging system, except unlike games nowadays where you actually can tag in, it was actually, like you said, it was a team-based game. You would fight one-on-one, and rather than getting 2 rounds, best 2 out of 3, every time you lost a round, one of your fighters would drop out, and then the next one would move in.
Yeah, and the team I first attempted to play, anyway, I believe is referred to as the Korean team, and that's with Kim, Cheng, and Choi. Now, Kim, he's a taekwondo expert. He only uses kicks for his attacks. Chang is this massive guy with a ball and chain. I believe he's supposed to be like an ex-prisoner. And then Choi, he has claws similar to Freddy Krueger on both hands.
But he's like a little itty-bitty dude with like a fedora hat and glasses.
Yeah, he's really small. In fact, in one of the newer games, Capcom vs. SNK 2, they decided he's so insignificant that rather than make him his own character, he's just a special move for Chang. So, but most of the teams were like that. They had 2 medium characters and then just one like throwaway. The first team I actually was able to beat the arcade with was the female team, which is Mai, King, and Yuri. But that wasn't until much later. Where I started playing competitively, Street Fighter started to become a pretty big thing. Well, specifically Street Fighter 2.
Well, of course. I mean, anyone who was at the arcades back in the 90s remembers Street Fighter. You couldn't go to an arcade back in the 90s without there being at least one of the Street Fighter 2 cabinets.
Yeah.
If it was the vanilla, or if it was tournaments, or if it was what was the Champion Editions? Yeah, it wasn't tournament, it was Champion Edition.
There was also a lot of bootleg versions that ended up in Corpus, where like the projectiles would move weirdly and like have odd effects, but you know, Street Fighter was so big that bootlegs actually made it to the arcades.
And then you also had like Street Fighter 2, Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it took them a really long time to get over Street Fighter 2. As a matter of fact, I think they recently released another version of Street Fighter.
Yeah, they recently, if they haven't done so, it's going to be out pretty soon on the Switch. I think it's like the 30th anniversary of Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
Which has got like an HD remake, a couple extra characters, including like Evil.
It's Evil Ryu, Violent Ken, and Akuma.
Yeah.
But
you want to talk about a game that just won't fucking die? This thing makes Skyrim look like a fucking baby.
Yeah.
So you re-releasing games, Capcom? We invented that shit. What are you talking about? You think you're so badass with your Skyrim on all the consoles? Fuck you.
Yeah, there wasn't any system that didn't try to get Street Fighter 2 on there, with many failed attempts. I'm pretty sure there's an Atari version out there somewhere.
I know there was a Game Boy version that was ass.
Yeah. But I was never really good at the Street Fighter 2 originally. I would always get my ass kicked in the arcades.
When you got your SNES Mini and you tried going to Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, and you went through there, you literally got to the second round, which was up against Ryu, and you played every single character, and he wiped the motherfucking floor with your punk ass.
That's why he's the champion.
It's like, wow, he really wants it. He is the champion. He has beaten all comers.
Yeah, that day wasn't so well
You
for me.
beat him one round, and then he came back and just fucking smeared you like a bug on a wall.
Yeah.
Like you pissed him off something fierce. He got a perfect on you that next round just to teach you a lesson. Teach you to fucking get your hopes and dreams up.
I think
This is how we did shit back in 92, motherfucker.
Yeah, I think my anus is still bleeding from that one.
It's like, well, I don't remember the game being that hard, but apparently it was.
Yeah. I came back and played it a few days later, and I actually did manage to beat the game.
Really? I thought you were going to say, I came back a few days later, I actually managed to get to the third round.
Oh, no, just Ryu, yeah, I had to...
He is a wall of pain that you must scale.
Yeah, I had to relearn how to do it, but I decided to play Sagat, and after I got through Ryu, the rest of the game was pretty easy.
Ryu, he is the giant wall of lemon juice and razor blades.
He is the paywall. But where I first really got captivated with fighting games would actually have been Mortal Kombat.
Yes, you mentioned how you played the game on your PlayStation until it fucking melted.
Yeah. Well, the first one I played was obviously the first one, and part of the reason I liked that one over Street Fighter was every character had the same basic moves. Now, this obviously doesn't make a huge variety for gameplay, but it meant that once you learned basic gameplay, you knew how to use any character. From there, it was just experimenting with their speed, strength, and learning how to do their special moves. Their special moves were the only thing that made them different. And for me, that was a really good learning curve. And
so if you got really good at doing just the regular basic moves, then you could pretty much master any character.
Right.
It's the special moves that made all the difference.
Right. And like most people, Scorpion was my favorite character, and he was the first one I was able to beat the game with, followed by Sub-Zero.
Well, back in the day, you were either a Scorpion guy or you were a Sub-Zero guy.
Yeah, most people weren't too concerned about the other characters. Raiden was the other one I saw used the most. But
because Homeboy was like, hey, I remember that guy from Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, his teleport and his torpedo gave you like really good screen control.
Of course, shooting lightning at people is like always fun.
Yeah, that's pretty boss. If you don't believe so, you need to watch the Emperor shooting down Luke. It'll teach you how it's done.
Like, that wasn't just shooting lightning. That was just straight up microwaving someone on a scaffold.
Yeah.
Fucking teach you to talk up at me, you motherfucker. Cook you like a potato.
Now, at least in my local area, the original Mortal Kombat wasn't really taken too seriously as a competitive fighting game. Obviously people did, but just compared to something like Street Fighter, wasn't as big. But then when Mortal Kombat 2 came out, that's when everybody really started to recognize the game. The cast gets expanded from 7 to 12 characters, and the variety of special moves is greatly increased. And at this point, like, the strength and speeds of the characters, there's a lot more variation to it. And even some of the basic moves are slightly different for the characters, so it starts to add a little bit of variety in that. But it's still mostly the same basics, unchanged from the first game. So if you were good at the first game, you go into the second, you still have the basic tools you need to get into it. And because 5 of the characters are returning from the previous game, if you were too intimidated to try some of the new people at first, you could fall back on some of your old favorites.
And of course, for the ones that don't return, you get to enjoy, seeing Kano and Sonya in the background in one of the fighting stages.
Yeah.
Hey, I remember those guys.
Yeah, it was decided they were the 2 least popular characters from the first one. So
they were chained up on public display to be ridiculed and spat upon.
Yeah.
Teach you to be less popular.
Yeah, and I got really good with Katana in that one. Scorpion, he got slowed down a little bit, so I favored Reptile over him. And the new Sub-Zero, I feel he was pretty broken at the time, but he was nevertheless a very popular character. I eventually learned how to master all of the characters because I bought a copy for my Super NES, and I had a friend who had it for the Genesis, and the two of us were just constantly beating the crap out of each other whenever we'd go to each other's houses.
Yeah, I remember the sad realization that Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo was inferior to the Genesis version, based entirely on the fact they removed all the blood and gore. Like, really, what is Mortal Kombat without the blood and gore?
I actually didn't really care about that. I mean, it certainly caught my attention when I first saw it, but for me, I had fun playing the game. And honestly, I feel like the Super Nintendo version plays better. I constantly hear from other people that the Super NES version is inferior.
Well, that's just based on like a content standard. I mean, the graphics going to be better, and it's probably going to play better just because you have more buttons to use and everything like that. And I know that the Sega Genesis has a better processor. That whole blast processing argument that they used to, put in all of their goddamn marketing, because that was like the one thing that the Sega Genesis had over the Super Nintendo. So they took that ball and they fucking ran with it until their legs broke.
Yeah. But no, for me, I felt the controls were a lot smoother on the Super Nintendo, even more so than the arcade. Of course, this is just a personal opinion, or maybe I just had an odd copy.
An overclocked version, you were lucky.
Yeah, but I had a lot of fun with it. I remember when I finally pulled off my first fatality with Scorpion, I was actually shocked because they had taken the blood out of the games, but they did have fatalities of sort, and Scorpion's was identical to his arcade counterpart.
Well, because his didn't really have any blood and gore. He would shoot a like a fucking blowtorch of fire from his skull, and then it would cook you, and then all that would be left would be just like a charred skeleton that would fall to its knees.
Yeah. Now, one fatality I've actually heard about from multiple sources. I've never seen any picture or video proof, but I've heard people mention this, and these are not people that would be connected in any sort of way. And it's got me curious. They say there was one fatality where you rip out somebody's spine and you started hitting them with it.
I never heard that one. It sounds like something you would see in a Mortal Kombat game, but definitely not the first one. Because I doubt the first one had the capability to do something like that.
Yeah.
It sounds like more like something from 2, or more likely 3.
3 is when actually, you started to kind of mutilate the corpses. And part 1 and part 2, most of the fatalities were pretty quick. And so, it's kind of surprising to me to actually have heard that one from multiple different people. So I'm kind of curious where the rumor began and what the basis of it is. Is somebody just misconstrued Sub-Zero's fatality, or
possibly?
Yeah.
Of course, Sub-Zero fatality is famous for being one of the driving forces behind the formation of the ESRB. That famous picture that fucking Joe Lieberman, that cocksucker, brought up. In front of those hearings where he showed Sub-Zero holding a severed head with the spine still attached to it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, don't fucking come crying to me like you've never seen that before. We've seen Predator. Get off your fucking high horse.
Yeah. RoboCop. It was for kids.
So you say. And if it was, that would be an amazing joke by... God, who was the guy who did that movie? What the fuck's his name again? Love his work, but I can't remember his fucking name. Paul Verhoeven. There you go.
I was going to say Jesus.
Well, there's so much I want to talk about that one, but that's got to be another video, because I could talk about RoboCop 1 and 2 for fucking hours.
I could talk about RoboCop 3 for hours. It was bad.
It was all kinds of bad. But getting back to the topic at hand, I'm trying to think back on what was my first fighting game that I actually saw. It probably would have been a Street Fighter 2, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I may have seen a Kung Fu Champion at the arcade and thought, wow, this looks like ass, even as a kid. By Atari standards, that game looked like ass at the arcades. If you don't know what Kung Fu Champion is, I believe it was called Kung Fu Champion. It was the one where you had 2 identical looking assholes, one in a white gi and one in a red gi.
Karate Champ.
Yeah, Karate Champ. And the only difference...
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Was the background would change, but it was always the exact same thing. You had these 2 guys would face each other, and they would fight in these horribly executed moves that moved slow as fucking molasses. the hit detection was just broken and wrong. And like if you jumped over someone, God help you, because it didn't auto turn to face. You had to put in like a specific button combination to turn your ass around to face your opponent. So if you were fighting the computer, your ass was just done. Because if you didn't know what that button combination was, you're just sitting there punching a fucking wall while the computer immediately turns around and starts rabbit punching your ass like the retard you are.
Yeah,
and you have like the little old man dancing around who's supposed to be the referee, and like sometimes they'd get like crazy with the backgrounds. Like if sometimes the background would be like a really bad digitized copy of a photo of like a tropical resort, and you'd see the little judge dancing around on a fucking palm tree in the background.
Yeah, I was actually pretty good at beating the computer on that game.
But there was no point. There was no other characters to fight. There was no other...
Yeah, there was no end either, so it's like you just eternally were stuck in this very bad video game.
It was a fighting game hell.
Yeah, I rented that one, and...
I'm assuming you regretted that decision. It's like, well, there's a fucking weekend down the toilet.
Well, it didn't take me long to get good at it. I never. The trick is not to bother to learn any of the special moves. Just learn the crouching kick and the crouching punch. Don't try to jump. Don't try to do standing attacks. Just, crouch and punch and kick as needed.
But yeah, that one's like, that one's fucking primordial. That goddamn game.
Yeah.
A game I do remember playing a bit. And actually being nearly obsessed with at one point when I was little was Yi Are Kung Fu. You ever play that one?
I might have, because I've played quite a few, but...
This one was a weird one. I forget who made it. It might have been Data East or some other company that did this. And the basic premise was you were this little chibi kung fu guy, and you fought these other chibi kung fu people. But the problem is that they all had super moves and weapons, and you did not. And the enemies got progressively harder, and like you always stayed the same. So it was essentially an endurance round. And man, I did not get nearly as far as I fucking needed to. Like the first guy you fight is this fat purple man who's bald. And he mostly fights you by doing the same basic moves you can do, but he also has the ability to like do a flying headbutt, like E Honda across the screen with his, or is it like a fucking like Jin dive? I forget if he either does a flying headbutt or if he does like a flying dive with his hands forward, like he's a genie or something. But one way or the other, like you have to fight him and like dodge his attacks, and your attacks basically just are comprised of punches and kicks, and that's it. You got crouching punches and kicks, you have jumping punches and kicks, but that's pretty much your entire repertoire. You have no special moves. After you beat that guy, the next person you have to fight is a dude in a yellow gi with nunchucks.
Okay, yeah, I think I know the game you're talking about. If not, I've played something
similar.
Yeah,
it was over at a restaurant called Wallbangers for a very long time. That's where I played it the most. Because back in the day, my parents, we used to go as a family to Wallbangers. Because you'd get some big-ass burgers and all the processed cheese you could stomach. But nowadays, we have a Fuddruckers, which has nearly the same thing. But and they're damn near the same price. But the Fuddruckers is within walking distance of our house, and the Wallbangers is quite a ways away. So we go to the Fuddruckers.
Yeah.
Well, that's if we go. And God, if you beat that guy with the nunchucks, who was a pain in the ass because his nunchucks let him attack a lot faster and a lot farther than you could, which isn't fucking fair. Then you had to fight this Chun-Li lookalike chick who threw shuriken at you. It's like, great, now I gotta deal with projectile attacks and shit.
Yep, I know the game you're talking about. Her name is Star. And there's a later girl you fight who kind of looks like Katana, and her name is Fan.
And she has fans.
Yes. And on the Game Boy version, they actually have another female character that is a hidden character, and her name is Dagger.
I'm guessing she has daggers?
Yes.
Like, I've read, like, there's a lot more fighters after that. They come in, like, tiers of 4, and then when you beat the 4th one, you move on to the next tier. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I didn't even get to the guy at the end of the first tier. There's no way I could have beaten this game.
Yeah, I want to say the arcade had 12 characters. But
like, yeah, it's like later on, supposedly you fight a guy with tumfas who, like, hits you really fucking hard and really fucking fast. There's a dude with a bow staff that I read, like, later on whose range is more than double yours. And it's like, how are you supposed to fight these assholes?
Mostly with jump attacks. I've seen a walkthrough of how to beat that game, and a lot of the times you just having to be very persistent and use a lot of jump attacks and sweep attacks. And yeah, a little bit of luck doesn't hurt.
Stubborn your way through that bullshit. Of course, there's Street Fighter 2, and back in the day when I was a kid, I didn't know shit about fighting games, and because generally I could get a quarter from my parents per trip to the arcade, if that, I didn't exactly have the opportunity to practice.
Yeah, you ain't getting a quarter out of my parents' pocket was like pulling fucking teeth. I don't know what it is.
It's like if... It's like, I'd ask for a quarter, my dad's got to fucking go on and on about Omaha Beach. It's like, you weren't in the fucking war, asshole. Your father wasn't even in the war. It's like, my grandparent who was in World War II was on my mother's side, not my father's.
Yeah, well, like, I remember, for me as a kid, it's like, after my parents were eating, they were smokers, so they'd want to spend, like, half an hour smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee.
Oh, that's horseshit. That's like, that should be a fucking law that you give your kids some quarters so that they could, like...
Yeah, and it's not like they want to talk to me about anything that interests me. So, son, how was your day? Oh, I saw Red and Stimpy collect boogers today and pull each other's brains out. Yeah, they really want to talk about that, like I got any fucking interest about their jobs. How was school today? Well, it was fucking boring. It's school. What do you think? Give me a quarter.
You want me to fucking dance? You want me to fucking dance for the quarter? I'll fucking dance for that quarter. I'll fucking tap dance right here and right now. I want that fucking quarter. It was like, yeah, like back in the day, a quarter for a kid was like a lifeline, man. It's like, that was a make or break to your afternoon. It's like, and fuck all those kids that actually, like, like their parents would be nice enough to give them a whole fucking dollar.
Shit, lucky bastards.
Yeah, they're fucking bombing in there like goddamn Richie Rich and shit.
Yeah, sometimes, you'd finally get your fucking quarter, and half the arcade machines were 50 cents.
Well, that was a bit later. Like, in the late 80s, early 90s, most everything was a quarter. But yeah, like, once you started getting to the more sophisticated things, like, you'd start seeing the 50 cents. For me, that was, like, the downfall of my arcade fun. I quickly learned to entertain myself by watching other people play or like watching the demo units, and I hated demo units that just repeated the same videos over and over again.
Yeah,
I'd rather watch like a randomly generated AI fight between two fighters for a fighting game demo than it just playing back the exact same like game footage over and over and over. But you deal with what you can get. Now back to the topic at hand. One thing, when I used to play Street Fighter 2 when I was a little kid, the first character I attempted to play the game with was Dalsim. Now, he is a very complicated character and not one you want to start off with, but when I was a kid, in my brain, I thought, well, he has the biggest reach of anyone in the game. So, since I don't know any of the special moves for anyone, and none of the big kids will fucking tell me,
yeah,
I'm going to have to just figure out how to get good with this guy. And you quickly learn that when Dalsim, like, extends his limbs out for attacks, that also extends his hitbox. Which, when you're fighting someone that can counter very well, or you're fighting the computer and they decide to be a dick, it's like you quickly realize that Dalsim's one of the worst fucking characters you could pick in that game.
Yeah, what I hate is his hitbox. His fists are actually part of his hitbox, so the computer can use a light jab and just punch you in the fist as they're coming towards him and counter you. Fuck you.
And this was back before like they actually had a built-in counter system for the Street Fighter games. This is back when like it was just a counter, as in like, you know, you try to attack them and now you're hurt and not them.
Yeah.
It's like later on in like the subsequent games, they would actually have a counter system where you'd get bonus points for launching a counter attack and canceling out someone's moves.
Yeah, though Samurai Showdown's probably the game that capitalized on that the most.
Oh yeah, Samurai Showdown was definitely a game that caught my attention back when you had the SNK like Franken arcade systems.
Yeah, it was one of the ones I was introduced to early on as well. Wasn't too good at that one either originally.
Well, I mean, if you're playing against a computer, you're straight fucked. It's an SNK game. Those games did not fuck around at all.
Yeah, and
those games were out for one thing, and that was your fucking money. And they mugged you for that shit.
Yeah, well, also, like, SNK is notorious for just doing input reads. And since that game is centered around counters and gives you bonus damage for counters, and it's input reading you and having the perfect counter every fucking time.
You want to go to explain to some of the non-fighting literate people listening what an input reading?
Sure. Basically, a good fighting game, they actually input algorithms for what these certain characters should act. In a bad game, they have them specifically reacting to the buttons you're typing in. So, Street Fighter, which has a good algorithm, certain characters will act aggressively, some will act defensively. For example, Blanca tends to act pretty defensively and attack with counter strikes, whereas Zangief will actually walk into an attack to try to get you with his spinning pile driver.
Which is why later on in the game series they actually gave him the ability to tank like lighter attacks before he would get staggered.
Right. And why Blanca is pretty fast at retreating and unleashing his counterattacks. Also, Ken and Ryu, while they had the same moveset, they both tend to act differently. Ryu focuses more heavily on his projectiles, while Ken focuses more on his hurricane kick and dragon uppercut as counterattacks. Ryu is more aggressive than Ken. Ken is more of a defensive fighter, at least when you're fighting against them. SNK, instead, what it does is its computer reacts to how you're moving and how you're attacking. And basically, the way you've got to beat these games is you have to outthink the computer, which is not easy for a kid. And for the most part, it's hard to play these games aggressively, unlike Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Of course, you could always play defensively. They have characters built around that. And if you've got the skill, you can pretty much play anybody defensively or offensively if you try. There's just certain movesets and combat styles will favor a more aggressive or more defensive.
Yeah, but like for me as a kid, there was essentially just the golden rule, which was if you're playing an SNK game, game's gonna kick your monkey ass. I mean, it's going to stomp you into the fucking dirt, and it's not going to apologize for it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, even a lot of the modern SNK fighters, they still rely more on input reading than actual algorithms for the characters. But
I just know I still can't beat them. But of course, like, you know, when I was a kid, like, and even to some extent as an adult, like, what you got to stand out from the crowd, and for Samurai Showdown, it was the fact that all the characters had a weapon of some description.
Yeah.
Even if it was like a small weapon, like Hanzo's sword and Galford's sword were just basic ninjatos. And most of their moves were based on like grapples or like ranged or like, you know, ninjutsu style moves.
Right.
But like still, like, you know, they can slash. Once again, going with the ranged is good thing. I always picked Tachinanaban Yukio, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Who, if you've ever played any of the Samurai Showdown games, I think he's in all of them. You can recognize him because he wears a white top and blue pants. And he has a very long straight sword, and he's generally facing away from the person he's fighting.
He also has long blue hair.
Yeah. So like his sword's pretty long and his attacks are pretty quick. His main downfall is the fact that once he launches his attack,
he's committed.
Yeah, like it takes him a while to bring his sword back to his sheath, and he won't attack until he gets it back in the sheath. So if you can land the attack, you can hit him hard, but if they block the attack or you miss, you are straight fucked, son.
Yeah, he's one of the characters I'm pretty good with when I remember you need to play the game defensively. A lot of times I'll play a Hamuro, which is the main character. He's got long, black, spiky hair, and he wears a...
He looks like your typical anime protagonist.
Yeah, and he has a black and white gi. He's got kind of a shorter katana, particularly compared to Akio. And he throws tornadoes out of his sword as one of his special moves. He's one of the characters you can play more aggressively, which is why I like him. Because I don't like, sitting there and... to me, it's kind of like spawn camping when you just sit there and play in the counter game.
Yeah, but God, I remember seeing people get to the final boss, but I never actually saw as a kid anyone beat the final boss in the original Samurai Showdownn.
Amasuka is a son of a bitch.
Yeah, dude's fighting you with a crystal ball, and he will still whip your monkey ass up and down that map. God damn it. Yeah. But man, it was interesting. One of the things I liked about that game was that it kind of kept track of the finishing blow. If you didn't use a fierce attack, like if you won the game with like a kick or like a non-heavy attack, generally you would see like in the winning pose, you'd see like your opponent like, like crying or just like upset that they lost. If you beat the match with like a heavy attack or something, then like sometimes at the end you'd see these two guys walking off with a body bag of your opponent like they didn't survive.
Yeah.
And if you were really lucky, you could land like a critical finisher, or like if you landed the slash, either they would cut in half or they would just spray arterial blood before they hit the ground. And if you could pull that off as a kid, you are fucking God.
Yeah. Speaking of pulling off for SNK, in King of Fighters, one of the features that they have, at least with King and Yuri, I don't know about some of the later incarnations, I think it's only these two females, but if you can finish them either by countering them with a special move or hitting them with a super move, you actually knock their shirts off and you can see their bra beneath it. And I
think that was something you could do with King in Art of Fighting, which is where they introduced her.
Yes, and actually it affects the story mode. Everybody assumes that she's a male because she's disguising herself as a man. She was only able to get taken seriously as a bouncer by posing as a male. And if you knock her top off, you reveal that she's a woman, and it actually does a minor change in the story mode. By doing that, you get a different cutscene, and I believe you get led to a different fight.
One thing I remember from Art of Fighting was that you only had two characters you could choose from.
Well, you only had two in the story mode that you could choose from, but there was actually a mode where you could pick any of the characters.
Well, like if it was a versus mode, like if two people put in a quarter at the same time, then you could choose from like other fighters. But if you were playing single player, it only gave you the option of those two characters. Just like in the original King of Fighters. It wasn't King of Fighters. Fatal Fury. In the original Fatal Fury, when you were playing single player, you only got to pick from the three protagonists: Terry Bogard, his brother, and homeboy who was the kickboxer.
Joe Higashi.
Yeah, Joe Higashi.
Yeah, well, this might have been for the home port, but it actually had like an arcade ladder where you could select everybody. Now, it didn't have a different ending for everybody. You picked anybody and you fought, I think it was Mr. Big at the end.
Yeah, but like SNK was known for doing a lot of Street Fighter clones back in the day.
Yeah.
I mean, like after Street Fighter 2 became a big deal, what was the big SNK game? World Heroes. And God, you want to talk about a blatant ripoff? Son of a bitch. Everything in that game was a ripoff. And World Heroes was supposed to be like a bunch of characters taken from like through time and like forced to fight in a tournament. I think they were like all heroes brought together by like a doctor with a time machine to like fight amongst themselves until the greatest hero would fight some sort of like evil like lord or something like that, like overlord or something. But you had this ripoff of Hulk Hogan who looked exactly like Hulk Hogan. I don't know who the fuck they were trying to fool. Who has like almost the exact same fighting style as Zangief. You have Genghis Khan, who has the same movement style and posture as Blanca, along with the same super moves. Instead of Ryu and Ken, you have Hanzo and I think Kentaro or something like that. It's supposed to be an Iga and a Fuma ninja. One's blue, one's red.
Yeah. Well, despite how much of a ripoff that one was, it was Fighter's History that actually got sued by Capcom for being a blatant ripoff.
And that was one I don't even remember.
That one I got to play a few times. In particular, I remember it because there was this weird clown character. Also, every character had a weak point of some sort. And, like, if you hit it, like, that part of their clothing would start to flash white, and if you hit it again, it would actually knock the clothing off. Now, in the case of the clown character, when you're first fighting him, he's got, like, this really evil-looking mask. But if you knock his mask off, you actually get to see his clown face. And you're kind of wondering how it fit all under that mask, because it's a lot of face.
Science fiction!
But, like another character, he had a band on his leg, or things like that. And did a lot of damage if you could hit him in the weak point and knock it off.
That alone would make it like somewhat distinct from Street Fighter, I'd imagine.
Yeah, but like quite a few of the characters, they are like literally moveset for moveset Street Fighter. In particular, there was one that mimicked Chun-Li that they started as the basis for their lawsuit. At least that's what I read in a magazine.
I'll have to check out some video of that. You told me that before, but I've never actually bothered to remember that shit by the time I get home and get access to my YouTube account. But one thing I do remember that World Heroes had that Street Fighter did not, I guess because SNK was like trying to distinguish themselves a little bit, was they had, like, you could choose to fight in the normal rings, and then you had the death rings.
Yes.
And those were fun, where like they had environmental hazards. I hated it when it stuck me on the lamest one, which is where like the sides of the ring were bouncy, and you had like these two big oil slicks in the ring, because none of those things did damage. It just moved you around a lot more than you were expecting. The ones I did like were ones where like the walls were spikes. There was one where like the ring was electrified. There was one where the ring was on fire.
Yeah, they actually introduced that element into Fatal Fury games as well, at least on the home ports. And
well, I could certainly set it apart from other games, because other games didn't have that. You wouldn't see like environmental hazards that actually affected health bars before the end of the map until you got to stuff like Soul Calibur and Tekken, or not even Tekken, but like Soul Calibur and Virtual Fighter, where you could get a ring out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then some of the later Mortal Kombats also had environmental hazards. Nowadays they have interactive objects, which you can also see in Injustice.
Yeah, but I mean, like, but back in the day, you know.
Oh yeah,
it was like Mortal Kombat would introduce like the stage fatalities.
Yeah.
But those only would be effective if you A, knew the buttons needed to initiate it, B, were on that stage, and C, that was only effect at the end of the map. It didn't affect the actual health decrease in a map. But okay, what was another fighting game? Not so much one from back in those days, but one that stuck out was Fighting Vipers. It was a 3D Sega Genesis fighting game. And this was like around the time of like the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn, I believe. I think was a home port that had it. And one thing I remember from that was, well, there was a couple of things I remember. One, all the characters had armor of some description. And if you could keep, kind of like what you mentioned with that other fighting game, if you could keep landing attacks on certain parts of the body, you'd weaken the armor, and you could actually knock it off of that part of the body. Or if you kept landing really heavy special moves, you could actually knock all of their armor off all at once.
Yeah.
But once their armor was off, you could do a lot more damage to them. So that was like your primary goal, was to knock the armor off of the limb you wanted to go after, and then you'd want to go after that limb repeatedly because they would take more damage as a result. Another thing I remember about that game was the fact that I always picked this one guy that had a guitar, because one of his moves would have him like thrust the guitar out. So it was like a really strong and really long-range physical attack. I seem to be noticing a pattern in a lot of the characters I mained with back in the day. It's like, reach out and touch someone and hurt them.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of characters I prefer generally are ones that you can jump in to combat and just start aggressively attacking. I find the best defense is destroying your opponent's health meter before he gets to attack you.
Get in there, put some hurt on them, and back off before they can hurt you back.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I remember from Art of Fighting was Ryo, who, once again, they said he was a blatant ripoff of, like, Ryu. And from Ryo, you get Dan.
Yeah.
Who was also a combination of the other guy whose name I don't remember.
Robert. Yeah, basically you're wearing Ryo's gi, except it's pink, and then you have the head of Robert with his ponytail, and then they made Dan the worst character in the game.
Who, like, if you want to insult the shit out of someone, you whip their ass with Dan.
Yeah, and in certain games, he actually hits really hard.
But his special moves are jank, but his physical attacks, like his regular non-special attacks, are like beefed up to compensate.
Right. Well, you jump in with his basic attacks and you use his special moves as like combo finishers. Like you get a couple jabs in and then you hit him with the fireball. Since the fireball's short range, it doesn't knock him back very far, and you keep him in short range where your physical attacks are most useful. So it was actually a trick to using him, and if you beat somebody, you got to rub it in their face. I beat you with Dan, but if you lose, it's like, no big deal. I was just playing Dan. Of course I lost. So
I wouldn't even been serious. What are you celebrating about?
Yeah.
Now, that brings me to another point. Bonus stages. Now, bonus stages in Art of Fighting were a big deal, because they actually you could choose which bonus stage you're doing. I think like one of them was like you had to like smash the ice. Another one has you like smashing beer bottles with a chop. And then one of them I think has you like jumping up and like breaking these boards with kicks.
There's a couple like that. I also remember one where you had to basically throw your projectiles at targets. Or you had to do like a certain number of projectiles within a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and like you did those, and if you were successful in completing these bonus stages, you could actually beef up the stat of your character, which if you failed, you might as well just stop playing. Because like those later bosses would wipe the fucking floor with you if you hadn't beefed yourself up with these bonus games.
Yeah.
Because like it's bad enough, like first you fight the kendo teacher who's like wearing a fucking kendo like outfit, except he doesn't have the sword, and then you fight some fat guy in a bar. Then you fight, God, who is it that you fight next? Do you fight King after that, or do you fight that weird dude with like the Vega claw and the monkey mask?
It's been so long since I played it.
Well, you play one and then you play the other. There's a couple other guys. There's like this one dude that's got like this long bow staff. He shows up in King of Fighters later on.
Yeah.
And there's
Billy Kane.
Yeah, then there's like this dude who's got, I think he's like Mr. Big or something like that. He's got like these two like short batons, and he's got like glasses, a bald head, and like a fur coat that he wears on his shoulders.
I think that's Mr. Big.
But then after that, you have to fight Mr. Karate.
Fuck Mr. Karate.
Well, that's the thing. There was the rub. Mr. Karate, before you get to him, you get this one bonus stage where you have to do this really complicated special move, and you have to perform it precisely correct, and you have to do it a couple of times.
3 times.
3 times. in order to learn it. If you fail this, you're not going to beat Mr. Karate, because you can only beat him, at least from what I've read, because I never fucking got up to him. You can only beat him by using that special move. It's like you can't beat Sagat in the original Street Fighter unless you hit him with like at least one of your special moves, because he fucking tanks your basic attacks like they're just raindrops.
It certainly helps to be able to learn that special move, but you can in fact beat him without it. It's just a motherfucker.
And I think like afterwards, because like all he looks like a palette swap of Ryo.
Yeah, he's just wearing a Tengu mask and he's got a gray suit instead of orange.
Yeah, and I think like afterwards it's revealed that he's actually your father wearing the Tengu mask, and this was like all like, or at least for Ryo, and like it's all revealed that this was just him testing you or some bullshit like that.
Well, Robert's stake in this is Yuri is his girlfriend.
And that's like the chick you're trying to save throughout the game.
Right. Ryo's sister is Yuri, and it's Robert's girlfriend. She shows up in the second one as a playable character, and also as part of the female team in the King of Fighters series.
It was like, like that's kind of dickish from your dad. Is like, hey, I kidnapped your sister and your friend's girlfriend, and like I made you fight to the death with a bunch of these other assholes.
With a whole bunch of mob bosses.
Yeah, just like, just so that you could learn a little bit more about fighting. Go fuck yourself, Dad. I'm gonna go buy a gun.
Guess who I'm using it on first?
I am giving up karate forever. And not just because there's a pending lawsuit with Street Fighter. Or Capcom, to be more precise. Let's see. Bonus stages, of course, everyone remembers Street Fighter, the car.
Everybody loves the car.
And then, like, later on you had the barrels, and then after that you had, the oil drum pyramid.
Yeah, there was the oil drum pyramid. There was also the brick pyramid, the barrels from the ceiling. I believe there's also one that's like some stone pillars that you gotta break.
That might be in one of the later games, because I don't remember that from the original.
Yeah, I might be rethinking the bricks or a different game, but the car is definitely the best one.
He's like, you get to beat this shit out of like a 1992 sedan or a 1991 sedan. Let's see, the Mortal Kombat ones were rather interesting. They were button mashing mini bonus games.
Yeah. But
like first you karate chop through like a block of wood. Then it's like what, like a bunch of stone.
There's 5 in the original. The test your mights.
Yeah.
First is a stack of wood, a stone brick, a steel anvil, a hunk of ruby, and finally a diamond.
Yeah, and if you can break through a diamond, then you're in a video game, because that's a load of bullshit.
Yeah.
What it should be is like, see how badly you can break your fucking hand on a diamond that big.
Yeah.
And secondly, who the fuck got a diamond that big just that you could try to break it?
Yeah, it's a diamond the size of a watermelon.
Bigger. The thing's the size of a fucking anvil, and not even like a regular anvil that you can get at like a tool shop, but like a big cartoon fucking anvil. It's like when people think anvils, they think of like these giant things the size of a human torso. If you've ever actually seen a real fucking anvil, like an actual anvil, is like maybe a foot, 2 feet across at most. They're not that big. They're not like the big fucking thing you saw like in the old Popeye cartoons and shit.
Yeah. I was able to do the first 2 stages without trouble, the wood and the stone. But what me and my friends did when we would get to the later stages is we would take a pencil or a pen and just rub it between the buttons really fast.
There you go. By hook or by crook, goddammit.
And the diamond was still difficult because it was like at the absolute top of the meter that you had to build up.
You had to max that fucker out.
But you could do the anvil or the ruby without too much trouble.
Wasting a perfectly good ruby. Just so that you can show off how big your dick is. Who's a real man now, Sonya?
Oh, I'm pretty sure there's some hentai out there where Sonya's a real man, but I'm not going to look for it right now.
No, I'm not going to look for it ever. You can keep that shit to yourself when you find it.
Oh, I'm sharing it.
There's one fighting game, I don't remember the name of it, but I remember it caught my attention because one of the characters was like a tiger or a jaguar or something like that.
Okay.
And what also made it stand out was that rather than having like a health bar, you actually had like a little box with like a color on it, and it went from like green to red and all the shades in between. And numbers. The numbers indicated how much life you had left. And it had like a little profile picture of your character. And every time they get hit, like the face would wince. And then like, as they were getting lower in health, like, they'd look more and more in pain. But I remember like one character had like kind of like a Chun-Li like rapid attack, except it was like punching instead of the kicks. And I remember like I saw like the tiger. I was like, I'm playing this game. It was over at City Skates.
Okay,
but then
I
again,
hardly ever went there, so I probably didn't see it.
The only times I ever got to go to City Skates was like to go drop off or to go pick up my sister, because she actually like was able to go places. All right, what other weird ass eclectic fighting games did I try back in the day? Because there were so many. It got to a point where there was a fucking glut of them on the market, so they're all trying something different to like stick out from the crowd.
I don't know if this one would really be considered obscure or not, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it anyway. It's called Time Killers.
Oh, I was going to mention that. I'm glad you reminded me.
Yeah, it was at a pool alley that my dad went to. I would play the video games while he played pool with his friends. And
I remember it being over at Cinema 6.
It could have been. I didn't get to go to the theater a lot. But
and that place wasn't around for very long anyway.
But one of the features of the game was you could actually cut off the arms of your opponent fairly easily, and you actually had a decapitate move that you could execute pretty easily. All you had to do was hit all 5 buttons at once. And if your opponent was at a certain level of health and you did the decapitate, then you actually would just completely mutilate your opponent and chop them to pieces. Now, Time Killers, you basically had warriors from different times.
Yeah, like one of them was like a mantis. One of them was like a
some of them
chainsaw killer. One of them was like a future cybernetic warrior from the future. One of them was like a caveman. One of them, I think, was a Viking.
Yeah. And the final boss, if I'm remembering correctly, was the Grim Reaper. He had this weird shiny outfit. He'd start off in like, dark gloomy robes, and he'd cast them off, and he had this, it was almost like armor that was glowing pink and
green.
Like,
so first I thought it was like, the Grim Reaper. Now I realize I'm fighting Freddie Mercury.
Yeah. But I do remember he fought with a scythe, and that's probably why I think he was the Reaper.
Or some sort of like variation of the characters, like it's Lord Death.
Yeah.
But like, I remember like it was part of that whole Mortal Kombat thing where like playing up the gore factor. I remember like, rather than having like a high kick, low kick or something like that, instead you had a 5-button layout, and each attack would aim at a body part. You had left arm, left leg, right leg, and head. Yeah. Now, this wouldn't make you attack with those limbs. That was you attacking and aiming for those limbs. So if you hit the head button, your character would generally bring their attack ups high and aim for the head. If you go for like the leg, then the character would aim low and try to hit the leg. And if you got enough attacks or hit them like really hard, like with a lucky shot, you could like cut off their arm. And if you got both arms, then the opposing player was up shit creek, because that would disable a lot of their moves. Also, almost all the characters had some sort of like weapon. Like the futuristic guy had like a laser sword. Mantis had the big mantis claws. Chainsaw guy has the chainsaw, obviously.
Yeah, the Viking had an axe.
And then the caveman had like a stone axe. And like another thing that I found was interesting was that a lot of the levels were pretty fucking brutal. I remember that the Viking character's level shows like a bunch of like bloody, violent fighting going on in the background between like these Viking ships. One was like a castle that was like being sieged, and you saw people impaled on spikes. But the caveman one was the most brutal. Remember that one? The caveman stage had like a T-Rex or something akin to that was in the background, and it was dead. And you could see like blood pouring out of its eye sockets and its nostrils and its mouth. And you could see like spears sticking out from its head. And this was a layered background, so as you moved, the background would move in like parallaxing layers. And so if you moved too much to the left or to the right, you could actually see that this T-Rex's head wasn't even attached to the body anymore. Like from when you're standing in the center, it looks like the head's sitting right in front of the body, like that's where it's supposed to be. But because of the parallax scrolling, when you moved to one side of the ring, you could actually see that the head was decapitated. So you saw the big bleeding stump of the neck.
Yeah, it was
like that was fucking brutal for back in that day, man. That was like that game came out right towards the end of the Sega Genesis lifespan. So I'm guessing right about the time that the Sega CD was coming in. So I'm guessing 93 or 94?
Something like that, I think. It also got a home port. Wasn't as good as the arcade.
I never saw a home port of it. I remember back when Sega Channel was a thing, they one of the games that they were like putting on as a home port to like test. Because for those of you who don't know, Sega Channel was a thing that before Time Warner Cable was a thing. They used to, I forget what the company, because like Time...
It was an attachment that you put on your TV and I believe your Sega.
Yeah, it was like this thing. You put it in there and it was essentially like the predecessor to streaming gaming.
Yeah, you got to play test new games before they came out.
Well, it was 50 games a month. It would rotate out the games. It would actually save your progress on a lot of the games, though, whenever the new month rolled around and they reset it. Even if the game was still, like, you know, they kept the same game, it would delete your save file. So you had a month to beat these games. But there'd be like about 5 or so games that was like, you know, hey, these games are coming out. And you could play them for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then it would automatically boot you out. And one of them was Time Killers, but it never got a Sega Genesis release, to my knowledge. I think it only came out like on the Sega 32X or the Sega CD combo.
I'm not sure like which part of the Genesis it came out, but it did get a home release of some sort.
Yeah, it wasn't on the Super Nintendo, and it wasn't on the generic Sega Genesis, to my knowledge.
Yeah. But there was another game, it was not an official sequel, but considered a spiritual successor, called Bloodstorm. And that one, the graphics were similar, but improved. And that one, rather than weapons, most people had like some kind of arm cannon, and it usually had some sort of blade attachment to it. And
watch the Mega Mans fight each other.
Yeah, and in that one you could sever limbs quite easily, a lot easier than you could in Time Killers, and you could actually also cut them in half, which would prevent them from actually being able to move on the screen, but they could still attack with their arms. And every stage also had a death pit of some sort, and if you hit them just right, it was an instant kill. Like if you were at the edge, you might knock them through a wall, and then they would fall on a stalactite below, or something to that effect. Now, that one I only got to play at the arcades once, and I got my ass kicked really bad because the computer knew how to just chop your limbs off without a thought. But I do remember the name of the character I played. His name was Hellhound.
I'll have to look up some footage of that later.
Yeah, I've looked at videos of it as well, and it looks like it would be a fun game once you knew how to actually play it, but for me, it wasn't very fun at all for the 2 plays I did, because I just got my ass wrecked. I would love to get my hands on an actual arcade cabinet of Time Killers. Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure they're probably rare right now, because like that came about the same time you had like the whole like fucking video game witch trials.
Yeah. Well, I had almost bought an arcade cabinet of a pretty obscure game. Some people know about it, others won't. But during the Mortal Kombat era, tons of clones were coming out. and there was one called Tattoo Assassins.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this never got an official release, but there were a few test arcade cabinets that got made, and quite a few of them got dismantled and destroyed. And I actually found one for sale that was damaged, had been in a flood. Now, I was able to actually afford the cabinet at the time because it wasn't selling for much, and the game was still really obscure at this point, so people weren't actually looking for it. But I couldn't afford the shipping cost of getting a whole arcade
It's like,
cabinet.
oh, the cabinet isn't so bad. It's like, the cost to lug that heavy goddamn thing to you.
Yeah, it was actually more expensive, but nowadays
That's what I was going to guess.
Yeah, nowadays a lot more people know about Tattoo Assassins, and so
Because of, like, the litany of YouTube videos covering it.
yeah, and so I imagine trying to buy that cabinet has gotten a lot more expensive.
I've seen gameplay footage of that you've shown me, and that game looks like a bad acid trip. It's like someone took a shitload of shrooms and then played way too much Mortal Kombat.
Well, I think the story's kind of interesting. A lot of people just immediately dismiss it, but the concept is there's a group called the Order of Colors, and they
Founded by Joseph and his army-destroying Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah, well, they found that certain individuals, when given these magical tattoos, were actually able to access powers. And one of the members of the Order of Colors decides to become an asshole about it.
As you do.
And starts creating an army of mutants. So the Order of Colors goes out to find these hosts to try to find some heroes to go take care of them. And it turns out that he is able to possess people who have these powers. And they have to utilize this one woman who can allow you to control one of the fighters that they've made, and you have to go and basically kill them all, and eventually him and his mutants.
Of course, like, this game was known for having, like, a bunch of absolutely nonsensical fucking fatalities.
Yeah, I think it's over 2,000 fatalities it claims to have.
Like,
And
a lot of them are just, like, the most random shit you could come up with, like...
some of them aren't even really fatalities.
Like, one of them has, like, a woman bends over and farts, like, fully cooked turkeys at you.
Yeah, and then, like, the screen says turkey farts at the bottom, and each time one of these turkeys hits something, be it your opponent or you, it splits into two more turkeys. And there's this nice buttery sound as the turkey starts spraying out of her ass.
Of course there is.
But, yeah, like, a lot of them, you're just changing your opponent into random objects. Like, there's an Indian who is kind of a ripoff of Nightwolf named Billy Two Moons, and you can, like, turn him into a cactus.
Like, some of them you make the characters, like, end up naked. Some of them... I think one of them turns them into the sinking Titanic or something like that.
Yeah, there's a character named Luke, and he's supposed to be, like, a submarine officer. And what happens is a boat, like, falls on top of your opponent, and he says, "Eat ship and die."
I think, like, that game was, like, one of the developers of that game was the guy who was the actual physical body actor for the Johnny Cage.
Yes, he plays a character in there called AC Current, and he looks just like Johnny Cage with some neon highlights and some weird glasses. Now, his moveset's different than Johnny Cage. He uses, like, electricity for his attacks. And everybody has some sort of fart attack.
Because why not? It was the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, you have, like, a stun fart, which is like these green bubbles that just kind of rise out of your character as they, like, pull their pants aside, or in the case of the females, they pull their thong aside. And then you have the acidic diarrhea fart, where your character does a full-on bend over, pulls their pants down, and these greenish red flames come out of your ass, and that'll take out a quarter of your opponent's life bar.
And then wonder why this game never got a full release.
Yeah, well, part of the problem was developers had never worked on a video game before. And,
no. The hell you say?
And they were given like this incentive bonus that if they could get the game finished within a certain amount of time, they would get this large bonus. And so they rushed it a lot more than they normally would have and didn't get as much research into building the game.
What the hell's a low kick? I don't know. Do a fart.
Yeah.
No, the kids love that shit now.
Now, this is a game that I think if they actually took the time to, it could be made into a serious fighting game. Take out the acidic diarrhea and the farts and stuff like that, or, have that as a secret mode that you can add where everybody gets, like, their fart and barf on. But, have, like, the core game mechanics taken seriously.
They can call it a special mode, they can call it Chili Night or something like that.
Yeah.
Taco Supreme.
Hell, call it Nasty as a nod to the Sega Genesis code for Mortal Kombat. I mean, it's a Mortal Kombat ripoff. Why not throw an ode to it? But, yeah.
Of course, Soul Calibur was another one of the fighting games that was big in the day. That came out about the time the PlayStation 1 was a big deal.
Yeah, I didn't really get into that one too much. I've owned Part 2 and I've owned Part 3. And,
actually, no. The original one was Soul Edge.
Right.
And for some reason, they decided to make the second one Soul Calibur. And now they're all just Soul Calibur 1, 2, yada, yada, yada. I don't even think they bother with arcade releases anymore. It's all just straight to home console.
Yeah, I think they're on Part 7 right now.
Well, they're working on a new one that's coming out. I think there's like a thing on it in the latest Game Informer.
Yeah.
Or I might have seen a trailer in game trailers, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I do have an interesting story, and I think you were here for it. One of my friends, she was really, really good at Soul Calibur. Her favorite character was Astaroth. And I got a copy of Soul Calibur 3. Now, she had an injury that was causing her to lose her eyesight. And by the time this happened, she was, in fact, blind. And we're playing Soul Calibur, and she starts to realize that she recognizes what moves we're doing by the sounds. And so she decides to go ahead and give it a try. She just needed us to explain, like, what level we were on, and roughly about how far the characters were apart. And she fucking whooped our asses. She mutilated us. And she was kicking our ass so bad we decided to cheat. You could actually adjust the health bar to the point that you don't take damage. And she realized that we weren't dying by the time we were supposed to, so she just started wringing us out.
It's bad when you're getting your ass beaten by a blind woman.
And yeah, she fucked us up. So
now, one thing I found hilarious was like in the more recent Street Fighter games, it gives you the option of creating your own character. And one fun little thing for all you people out there, get a hold of one of the games that has the create a character mode and the ability to unlock various costume pieces and do random fights. And it's like watching a bunch of inmates in an insane asylum try to murder each other. You'll see like someone with like one high-heeled shoe, the other one's barefoot, they're wearing a tutu and like a samurai armor breastplate and like a friar's tonsure on their head and an eye patch.
And it's all neon green.
Yeah, and like with like the big fucking like hoop blade. And you see someone that looks like fucking Tinkle from The Legend of Zelda with like the bladed boots coming as his opponent. It's like, wow, these people just like, we're going to give these people a bunch of weapons and take them off of their medication and throw them in a ring until someone's dead. It was hilarious. Just the completely random shit the computer would spit at us. And it wasn't even so much like the fighting bit. It was just fun to look at, like, what kind of monsters the computer would random up for us to play as. It's like, all right, what fresh hell is this going to be today?
Yeah, it was great, you know, like the character screen would like reveal who player one was, and you know, we all fucking just blow our guts laughing, and then it reveals player two, and it's like, oh my god, it's so much worse.
It's like the second player is always worse than the first. I don't know what the fuck was up with that, but that was the thing.
Yeah, then, you know, we do battle as our horrible fuchsia monsters.
Primary colored nightmares.
Yeah, that was
like, I just got my ass gripped by a Dayglow ring crazy man. But,
sometimes the funnest part was like what weapons these randoms would get paired off with.
For some reason, it favored the giant metal hoop and the bladed boots. For some reason, it just loved those two weapons for the random generation.
Yeah, what I would usually find hilarious is you'd get like one of these abominations and it would give them Voldo's moveset. So
they, like, you know, their movements were like similar to like their appearance and seemed to match. Voldo was actually, like, you know, I sucked playing as him in the game, but he was one of my favorite characters just based on his appearance and on his story. Because from what I read, and he's like one of the few characters who's been there for like most all the games, and like the games are like in a linear order, like they take place like several years apart. So the characters who come back are older the next game. It's kind of like Tekken in that respect. Of course, they're both made by Namco.
Yeah.
But Voldo was an interesting character. If I remember correctly, his story was that he was a manservant to a very rich hermit who needed someone to protect him and to protect his treasure. Now, to make sure that Voldo would never reveal the location of the treasure to anyone, he had his ears like soldered shut with like ironing brands, his eyes put out with ironing brands, his tongue cut out, and his mouth sealed along with the rest of his head in like a big fucking like Hellraiser-esque like leather thing. Of course, some of his costumes have it being made of steel or brass, but otherwise it's like this thing that like encapsulates his whole fucking head. So he's blind, he's mute, and he's deaf. And so he actually has to find people, and he fights them based on movement and based on smell, which is fucked up. And of course, like, if you've ever seen him move, he has this very langy, like, fucking awkward way of moving where, like, he moves very fluently. And, like, sometimes he'll fucking come at you walking backwards faster than he walks forwards, and that's a fucking nightmare to see.
Yeah, or, like, when he does that spider crawl of his. And
oh, yeah. He is just, like, he is challenging to master. Because, like, a lot of people, like, you know, Soul Calibur's easy because you can button mash the fuck out of that game. But, like, Voldo, if you could master him, he is a fucking beast.
Yeah.
But he's kind of set back by the fact that his weapon is like these three-bladed katars that he has attached to his hands. So his attack range is very short, but he's got some mean fucking grabs.
Yeah, one character I enjoy playing as her, but I'm not good at her, is Ivy. I really like her concept. I think her moves are cool, but because of the way she attacks and her range, it's kind of like Ukyo. When she makes an attack, she's committed to it, and if you don't hit, you are open as hell.
Well, she's got two different ways of attacking. Her basic weapon is that short sword, but it has the ability of... It's a serpent sword. It segments into like these segments of blades attached by a wire, so she can use that to whip around, or like one of her moves is where she shoves the sword into the ground, and like the blade of it pops up out of the ground and attacks from below.
Yeah.
But the input determines the range. Like, you can have this thing like shoot out like yards in front of you, like well past where the enemy is. You gotta know the proper input to like get it to go in the range where you want it to land.
Yeah, another character that I tried to get good with, but had a lot of trouble with, And this was actually due to a mechanic I didn't realize they put in the game, was Tira. Now, I noticed that roughly about half the time she was doing what I wanted her to, but it turns out the character's bipolar, and depending on what personality she has, determines how she's going to attack.
Oh, she must be one of the newer characters, because I'm not familiar with her at all.
She's the one with the big ring.
Oh, yeah, she was brought in the later game. She's not, like, part of the first 2 games.
Yeah, she was from part 3. Yeah, I wanted to get good with her, but I didn't know that, like, depending on her personality would determine how she attacks, and you actually have to pay attention to the way she's talking to determine what mood she's in. Also, at the beginning of the screen, depending on her facial expression, will tell you what mood she's in. So, yeah, you had to know, like, how to use all of her aspects in order to be good with her.
I forget which one, but one of the Soul Caliburs had the ability where you could, like, when you would do a versus mode, like, it would do a zoom in to the characters, and, like, by hitting a different button, you could change their facial expressions. And so it was fun to, like, just, like, hit random buttons, and you'd see their faces start spazzing out like they're having a fucking stroke.
Yeah, I forget which one it was, but you'd press a button and they'd say, like, one of their taunts during the versus screen.
So it just, like, quickly becomes them, like, yelling at each other impotently from across the screen.
Well, Astaroth has one where he just yells, "Shut up." And I had a friend that was drunk at my house, and he's watching me play, and I was getting annoyed, but I was trying to be a good host, so what I would do is I would just keep playing Astaroth and keep spamming the "shut up" taunt until he actually got that I was talking to him.
I thought you were going to, like, if he was drunk enough, you're going to try to convince him that he was having a verbal argument with a video game character. Like, he starts talking and, like, you know, Astaroth yells out, "Shut up." And, like, you know, he starts talking back and you hit the "shut up" button again, and then he's getting into a full-blown argument where the only retort is just the character saying "shut up." It's like convincing someone who's high as a kite that their legs have left the building without them. It's like, "Where's my legs, man?" It's like, you better go fucking get them.
Oh shit, they got hit by a car.
And of course, going back to the whole Mortal Kombat thing, another game that Midway threw out there during the Mortal Kombat craze was, of course, Primal Rage. I remember this one in the arcades because this one, like, its demo mode was loud as fuck. So, like, yeah, you put this in any arcade, I don't care what arcade it was, you could hear that shit above all the other games.
Yeah, it'd be near the entrance of a CC, another arcade all the way in the back, all just letting you hear Rage.
Well, like, it was like, for me, it was like the opening demo. You know, the one that went by way too fucking fast? You're, like, trying to speed read all that shit?
Yeah.
Even as an adult, I can't fucking read that fast. It's like, they expect kids to read this shit? Oh, no, of course not. They don't. They know kids don't give a shit.
Kids aren't going to read it. Fucking dinosaurs.
They just want to see dinosaurs eat each other.
Yeah, honestly, the basic concept of it, I think, is brilliant. You know, you just put a bunch of angry dinosaurs in there and start killing each other. They just needed more dinosaurs.
Yeah, the basic premise for that game was that another, like, world-ending meteor lands on Earth, but rather than wipe out all life, it forces the continents to realign to form the shape of a giant T-Rex skull taking the bite out of something. Yeah. And because of it, like, these giant monsters that take the form of like giant dinosaurs and whatnot, like, come out of the ground and essentially take over the Earth, and, like, humans who have been brought down to little more than, like, you know, squealing cavemen start worshipping them. So they have this giant war to see who's going to be the one, like, dinosaur god.
Yeah. Now, it turns out that meteor was going to be the egg of the boss that they never put in the game.
Oh, that's a shame.
I think his name was Necrosan.
Well, because, like, at the end of the game, what is it? It's just like an endurance match where you have to fight a bunch of the characters one after the other, like, with no pause in between. Yeah,
you have to fight all the characters. The difficulty is actually slightly easier at this point, and before you actually go into the endurance match, you have a chance to eat a bunch of your followers to have an extra life bar.
Yeah, but if you were like me and didn't know the command input to like actually eat the the little characters, because there was like a special move that allowed you to like eat them. You couldn't just hit a button and just eat them. Like the game had like your little followers would be like following along on the bottom of the screen, and certain moves would cause them to fly up in the air. And if you hit this input at the proper time, you could snap them out of the air and eat them, and that would actually increase your health bar.
Yeah. There was also a trick, and it was on the beach stage where you fight Showdownn, but if you knocked a human into the air and your opponent hit it back towards you, and you kept this up for 3 rotations, a volleyball net would actually appear between the dinosaurs, and you could start battering the human back and forth like a volleyball.
It's like my favorite character in that game was Showdownn because he was the biggest T-Rex in the game, but of course I chose poorly because he also has the most difficult moveset in the entire fucking game to learn.
Yeah,
It's like his moveset is reminiscent to fucking T-Hawk from Super Street Fighter 2. It is just a load of bullshit.
well, actually, a lot of the special moves in that game were pretty bullshit, but yeah, Showdownn was pretty damn hard.
I should have gone with Inferno.
Yeah, he's actually pretty easy to use.
He's just a fucking palette swap of Showdownn, except he's slightly smaller, and he's like, where Showdownn like uses sound-based attacks, Inferno uses heat-based.
Yeah, my favorite character initially was Vertigo.
The serpent.
Yeah, I remember reading she's classified as half cobra, half Ephorasian, which is not a real dinosaur, and I can't find out what kind of fake dinosaur that is either.
So rare? Fuck you, books.
Yeah, but after I
It'd be great if it was just like some made-up Narnia shit that, like, you know, they put in there. It's like, what is she going to be half with? I don't know, make up something.
kids aren't going to read this shit. But once I beat the game as her, I got kind of bored with using her, so I started trying Armadon out, and he became my favorite character.
Yeah, he's interesting, but for me, he was just too slow.
He is really slow, but he hits like a truck. And he's got some really, really nasty corner combos with his horn attacks. You don't even need to know how to do his special moves to be good with him. He is just brutal. And,
of course, you got the Sub-Zero character, like the giant ice monkey.
Yeah, Blizzard.
And the smaller variation that was, of course, like, you know, everyone loved this character to some extent.
Chaos,
yeah. He was a little monkey who fought with, like, acidic pee, acidic barf, and toxic fart clouds.
Yeah, and from Chaos' story, he was actually a human that got transformed into this sick little monkey.
Like, literally.
But, yeah, Armadon, if I'm remembering correctly, basically he comes out of hibernation when all this goes down because he doesn't like the noise. And so he goes and he conquers the world so it'll be quiet again and he can go back to meditating.
It's like that. I think they actually used that plot for Dial M for Monkey episode in Dexter's Lab. Like the giant magma monster that like comes out of the ground because like the city's just too loud and all he wants is for people to shut the fuck up.
Yeah. I actually was inspired enough by Primal Rage that I made a section of my D&D campaign after it, where there was these islands and the people there would worship these giant dinosaur monsters.
Well, anyway, we've gone on for about an hour and a half. I think this would be a good point to stop. Yeah. And if you guys had any fighting games that you played back in the day or any that you play now, go ahead and mention them in the comments.
Yeah, tell me about obscure ones. I love learning about games that I haven't gotten to play.
Yeah, Fat's here. He likes to know lots about the fighting games. I'm just interested in learning about new games in general. And we'll probably come to this topic again. You know, like obviously video games, there's so much to talk about. But even fighting games again, because there's couple of fighting games I never mentioned, stuff like wrestling fighting games in the arcades, like Saturday Night Slam Masters, WrestleFest, Superstars, all that stuff.
Yeah, and I certainly could talk about Mortal Kombat for hours. We barely scratched the surface on that. Killer Instinct is another great one.
Oh yeah, but we'll have to come back to this topic again. But in the meantime, this has been Fat and Angry. He's fat, I'm angry, and you have been listening to us talk.
And you should eat cookies.
See you guys next time.